It's time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. The US Congress approved a massive $777 billion defense budget for 2022, marking a 5% increase from last year. As America turns its focus to the Indo-Pacific region amid its rivalry with China, the bigger military budget will aim to prop up resources and new defense technologies, as well as better provide support for servicemen and women. We discussed some of the changes seen in the National Defense Authorization Act this year and what it means for countries in East Asia. For this, I'm joined by Bosco, former China Country Director for the US Secretary of Defense and opinion contributor to The Hill, and Professor Young-Jun Kim at the Korea National Defense University, who is also a member of the National Security Advisory Board to the South Korean President. Very warm welcome to you both. And well, let's start with you, Mr. Bosco. Now, the US Congress actually gave $25 billion more than Biden asked for in the defense spending plan for next year. The bill includes a $7.1 billion budget for the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, a statement of congressional support for the defense of Taiwan, as well as a ban on the US Department of Defense procuring items produced with forced labor from China's Xinjiang region. Now, what do you make of the changes in this year's NDAA, and do you think the increase in spending is justified?
Yes, thank you for having us. I believe it's not only justified, but it's a very positive and important development. It demonstrates, first, that there is no great difference between the Biden administration and the United States Congress on the kind of threat that is emerging in the Indo-Pacific. That's extremely important. And it's also important that it was bipartisan, that there is no difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party in the nature of that threat. So I think the increase in the defense budget is a very positive development, and it should send a message to China that the United States, at least on this issue, is quite united in opposing its activities and behavior in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, Professor Kim, we've seen countries like Russia, China and the US all ramping up their defense budgets, and recently they've been testing hypersonic missiles. Now, why are they all rushing to develop this technology? What is the strategic significance of this weapon?
Thank you for having me. In the three dimension of the importance, especially technical level, current U.S. missile defense cannot defend the hypersonic missile system, especially Russia has created the Kinzhal and Avangard. And also, at strategy level, we can discuss about the deterrence issue as well. Your deterrence means from this hypersonic missile system is very controversial. And finally, political diplomatic level, we can discuss about the symbolization of useless of the current U.S. missile defense system. It will leave some kind of fear, like controversy in the U.S. military committee as well.
Well, Mr. Bosco, the Biden administration, of course, it's made a very strong shift to the Indo-Pacific region, but the new defense bill seems to indicate that Russia is still continuing to pose a threat along with Iran. Do you expect the threat from these countries to intensify?
Is that for me, Soo Young? Yes, I believe certainly in the short run, the pressures will intensify from both Russia and China. And there's even some indication that they are cooperating and coordinating their own moves in their respective regions and kind of catching the U.S. in a position where we have to respond to one threat on one side of the world and another threat on the other side. Whether or not there is actual coordination, certainly the effect of the two challenges in Ukraine and in Taiwan and the South China Sea are having that effect. And I think the United States will be able to respond. It's planning on responding to both threats, even simultaneously if necessary. It will not be an easy task, but it is essential to not only U.S. national security, but to international peace and stability.
And Mr. Bosco, well, Russia and China, they've been boosting their conventional and cyber capabilities, and also appearing to cooperate in space technology as well. How wide or narrow is the race when it comes to these new technologies between these countries and the United States? And how can the United States stay ahead of its competitors?
Well, it's quite a challenge technologically and financially and in other ways. But in a sense, one could argue that China and Russia are forcing the United States into an arms race. And we know that the last time there was an arms race was with the United States and the Soviet Union. It did not turn out well for the Soviet Union. Some people argue that President Ronald Reagan, in effect, forced the Soviets to spend themselves into oblivion. I hope that China and Russia don't force the United States to engage in that kind of an arms race. But if it does, I think they will find out that the U.S. has a very, very resilient economy and a very strong political situation that will deal with the challenges.
And Professor Kim, I want to hear your thoughts on the possibility of an arms race. Now, China has been deploying short and medium range ballistic missiles to counter US naval carrier groups in the disputed waters of the South China Sea and also around Korea and Japan. Do you think Washington and Beijing are going to be able to sit down and discuss arms control, or do you think there's going to be an arms race escalating in the region?
We need an arms control regime in this region more than any other region because of arms race situation in this region. But unfortunately, very less possibility for the arms control regime, including Japan, South Asia, South Korea, North Korea, China, and the U.S. and Russia, and more possibility for arms race issue because the level of trust between the country, also U.S. and China. Strategic competition, and Donald Trump really wants to include China for new arms control regime in global wide, but China doesn't want to join because of they didn't have a more nuclear warhead than the Russia and the U.S. as well. So this kind of the problem prevents us to make the new arms control regime in this region.
Oh, well, Mr. Bosco, there's been a lot of concern around Taiwan, with the Pentagon last month having raised concern about the possibility of China wanting to force Taiwan into unification or talks about unification by the end of this decade. And well, does the US right now have enough defense capabilities in the first island chain? How should it really counter China, which is very rapidly and aggressively militarizing?
Well, the United States is in the process of beefing up or augmenting its facilities and its assets in the region. So in the event there is that kind of crisis, the U.S. will be well prepared. But what is missing, I believe, Soo-young, is not necessarily U.S. capabilities, but a clear message of intention to defend Taiwan. I think that is what is missing. Strategic ambiguity is not helping the situation because it leaves the door open to China to believe that if they do attack Taiwan, the United States may not intervene and may sit back and let whatever is going to happen. That is to me, would be a major strategic miscalculation on China's part. And I think it's very important and incumbent on the United States to express its intentions quite clearly so that China does not make a fatal mistake.
Professor Kim, well, the National Defense Authorization Act this year, it omitted a clause that bans the reduction of American troops stationed here in South Korea. And some have interpreted this as the US keeping its options open to deploy its troops flexibly, perhaps elsewhere in the Indo-Pacific region amid its rivalry with China. What is your opinion on this?
We need to understand a little bit recent historical background of that bill. During the Trump administration, Trump wanted to reduce the U.S. troops, not just Korea, but in Germany, in worldwide for the American First policy. But that's why the U.S. Congress have to defend kind of the U.S. troops in the Korea. But during the Joe Biden administration, it was not necessary for keeping U.S. troops by partisan support. And also, U.S. China strategic competition is uncertain, so U.S. Congress does not want to keep any kind of the status quo situation for more strategic flexibility. So that's why a different background may lead a different view.
And also Professor Kim, now former commander of the US Forces Korea, Robert Abrams, he indicated that the OPCON transfer won't happen until 2028 at the earliest. And the second stage of assessing the full operational capability of the ROK US Combined Forces Command is expected to take place next August. What is the reason that the process is taking so long?
Because of the different background, the early 2000s, we remember the U.S. Bush administration wanted more strategic flexibility for U.S. forces worldwide. Their Rumsfeld Doctrine, and they have also Iraq War at the time in Middle East and Afghanistan. But now the China issue is a problem for the U.S. So the U.S. administration does not want to open transfer. That's the most important issue. So there's a need to control power for USFK for uncertain situation, including Taiwan or Southeast Asia. So the U.S. administration doesn't want open transfer, and different situation from the early 20s during the Nomuyan administration. So we need to understand this kind of different situation, and we need to keep the update of the U.S. strategy in this region.
Oh, Mr. Bosco, over the past few years, there has been a lot of questions lingering around the issue of U.S. troops being deployed around the world and how flexible they might be, the dispatchment may be in accordance with the U.S.'s defense strategy. Do you see the possibility of U.S. troops in Korea being deployed elsewhere as the rivalry between Washington and Beijing intensifies?
I think there have been encouraging signals in the last several months that our allies, Japan and South Korea and other countries in the region and even in Europe, are well aware of the increasing danger from China's military expansion and from its very aggressive rhetoric and very aggressive policies. So I think the possibility of greater collaboration between Australia, the UK, France, Japan is high, and I think that China needs to take that into its calculations. One of the benefits of the increase in the defense expenditures is that it shows the United States is putting its money where its policies are. And so it's setting an example for our allies in the region and elsewhere to beef up their own defense spending and to send assets to the region to help combat the Chinese communist threat, which endangers the international peace and security for everyone in the region, and particularly through the South China Sea with its vital commercial sea lanes.
And also, Mr. Bosco, there's been quite some debate over whether the Biden administration is going to specify a no first use policy in its upcoming nuclear posture review. What do you expect to see in the review next year?
I do not. I believe there are solid reasons why the U.S. has not declared that kind of policy, and I think those reasons will continue to prevail. And I think the sentiment in the defense community and in the Congress, as well as in the executive branch, will probably keep the status quo as far as that policy.
I see. Well, this is all we have time for today. That was Joseph Bosco, former China Country Director for the US Secretary of Defense and opinion contributor to The Hill, and Professor Youngjun Kim at the Korea National Defense University, also a member of the National Security Advisory Board to the South Korean President, joining us on the phone today. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.